It's a little bit different than the narrative historical prose that you're probably more familiar with from your Hebrew grammar courses. Kohelet also uses a lot of verbless clauses, and so be aware of this, that often you're going to need to supply a verb, is, was, will be, or something like that. He also talks about the pronouns, and of course we find a lot of first-person pronouns, ani or anochi, in the book of Ecclesiastes. It's a very, very self-reflective book. We also find the use of the term lave, not in the sense of mind or heart, which is kind of your usual definitions, but the term lave is personified. It's something to whom or to which Kohelet speaks throughout the book. In terms of the verbal system, you don't find a lot of vayiktols, the past tense narrative verb form. You do find a lot of katals, perfect forms. And so be careful in how you translate these. They could be present tense, they could be past tense, they could be past perfect, or some other variation of meaning. You find infrequent yiktols, prefixed verb forms, and a lot of participles. And again, be very, very careful in how you translate the participles. Another thing that Holmstedt discusses, and is also echoed in Bartholomew, is dating the text of Ecclesiastes. And really the linchpin of dating the book of Ecclesiastes is its linguistic features, rather than kind of the face value kind of historical persona that the book appears to provide. Now, in terms of dating it, Hebrew diachrony, or the diachronic study of biblical Hebrew, is a very, very active field. And there is certainly some debate, as there are with any issue related to the Old Testament. But for the most part, we understand that Hebrew went through a number of changes over about the 1,000 years in which Hebrew was in existence. Now, biblical Hebrew, or classical Hebrew, was not really a dialect until about 1000 BC. And it stopped being spoken as a common everyday language, let's say somewhere around the 2nd or 3rd century BC, after the post-exilic period. In fact, we find that when Ezra reads the Torah to the people, he has to have it translated into Aramaic. And so already at that point, not everybody understood Hebrew. And so over the course of the lifetime of spoken classical Hebrew, it underwent some changes. And primarily, there's significant differences between the pre-exilic Hebrew and the post-exilic Hebrew. So in 586, Nebuchadnezzar destroys Jerusalem, takes a number of Judeans into captivity, and at the end of that century, when the Persians defeat the Babylonians, those individuals are allowed to go back, and many of them do. But we find that there's a number of linguistic changes that have taken place. And so we do find late features in the book of Ecclesiastes. And one of the most important features is, are the loan words that are found in the book of Ecclesiastes. And so we find some Aramaic loan words, although this is very, very difficult to use in terms of linguistic dating, because Aramaic was spoken throughout the ancient Near East during the lifetime of Hebrew. But key are the few Persian loan words that we find in the book of Ecclesiastes, one of them being pardes, which is where we get the English term paradise, and then pitron, another Persian loan word. Historical research has come to the very, very sound conclusion that there is no evidence for Persian loan words until the post-exilic period, and really until after the Persians conquered the ancient Near East. And so this is probably one of the most clearest pieces of evidence that puts the authorship of Ecclesiastes into the Persian period. I hope that was helpful in terms of some of the introductory issues that we covered. Now I want to talk about a few things in terms of the discussion, which was very, very good. A few things came up. Is Ecclesiastes material for Christian doctrine, or really any doctrine at all? And how would one incorporate Ecclesiastes doctrinally? Theological issues. Some raised the issue of determinism. Is Kohelet a determinist? Is he something else? Does he see God as providentially in charge of things, or does life kind of have its variability outside of God's kind of foreordained knowledge? Authorship and interpretation. Is authorship a necessary, is knowing who the author is necessary for interpreting the book, for the book being authoritative, for the book being inspired, etc.? And so these are things I want you to think about as we go throughout the course. Many brought up the aspect or the kind of idea that we have to recognize that Scripture is both human and divine, and we have to attend to the very human elements of the text. I would offer that that the very first question that we find in the book of Ecclesiastes is not meant to be rhetorical. That is, it's meant to invite you into discovering meaning and dialoguing with the author of Ecclesiastes and the text itself. And I would also recommend kind of reading the book of Job like that, with the number of questions that we find at the beginning of the book of Job. And so I would introduce you to a concept called dialogic theology. And you might want to look up an article called Dialogic Theology by a scholar named Benjamin Summer. And so I would encourage you to wrestle with the text, and I think that's what the text wants you to do. You don't have to agree with everything that Kohelet says or disagree with everything Kohelet says, but you need to dialogue with Kohelet as he thinks through some of these issues. And it's wisdom literature. It's meant to contemplate. You're not meant to read, let's say, the book of Proverbs straight through. You're meant to take a proverb at a time and percolate on it and think about it and let it sink in and affect how you think. Let it change the way that you view the world. And I would say that Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes, is meant to be something like that as well. So that was week 1. Let me briefly introduce week 2. You're going to read in English translation the beginning portion of Ecclesiastes, and I want you to put that into dialogue with some sections of Proverbs, Genesis, and the Psalms. And I want you to think through how Ecclesiastes relates to creation theology as well as other genres of wisdom. You're going to translate Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 1 through 11. I want you to use both Bartholomew's commentary and Homestead's commentary as dialogue partners to help you work through the Hebrew text. And in your exegetical notebook, I expect to see citation and interaction with those two texts. You're going to read an article by Roland Murphy, who's one of the prominent, who was one of the prominent Old Testament scholars on Ecclesiastes. You're going to read an article about translating Ecclesiastes, and then you're going to discuss that in the online discussion. You're going to see some videos on the structure of Ecclesiastes, Hebrew prose and poetry, and the issue of canonicity. And really that relates to inspiration and authority of the book, which has been a significant debate throughout history. I look forward to your continued interaction. Please make sure that you're posting on time in your online posts. I really enjoyed the discussions, and also make sure that you're turning in your exegetical notebook on time. Thank you, and have a great day.